A quick Google search shows us that $39,371 million have been spent on lighting systems in the US for the year 2020. Or maybe that's just $31,371 million. Either way, that's a lot of money, and if we're going to spend that much on a lighting system, we may as well make it a cool one. All this will be in the description, so don't stress. For this project, I used a 4-foot 2x6, an Edison style bulb, a 3/4 inch pipe flange, a 1 inch to 3/4 pipe connector, a 3/4 pipe that's about 2 inches long, some rubber plugs, and some lamp wire. Don't forget to get one with a switch, because it is a lamp. Here comes the easy portion. All you need is a drill, a circular saw, and an orbital sander, if you want to make your life a little bit easier, but you can always use sandpaper. You can of course do most parts of this project in any order that you'd like, but I recommend starting off with the metal pieces. Grab some acetone and a rag, because these pieces are sometimes dirty when you get them at the store. If I'm not mistaken, it's some kind of oil or residue, so be sure to wipe it all away. If you don't, the paint's not going to bond as well to the metal. In this case, we're going to go with Rust-Oleum's metallic finish paint. We're starting with the metal pieces because that'll allow the paint to dry before we handle them. I'm choosing to paint the metal because depending where you get all the pieces, they might be different shades. That, and it adds an extra layer of protection. Don't go too crazy with the spray paint. A thin layer from every angle will do. Just be sure to let it dry and then coat it again. Now that we have that covered, we can start sanding the 2x6. And when it comes to the sanding, I start off with 120 grit sandpaper, then move up to the 180 and end at 240. As I mentioned earlier, you can use regular sandpaper to do this, but having an orbital sander handy will make it a little bit faster. What you see me doing here is basically just a tactic to make sure I'm sanding evenly. The idea is you grab a pencil and leave marks all over the wood. You'll know you're done sanding when the marks are gone. Do this a few times with each grit. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the measuring. If you're using a 4-foot board, you should be leaving a mark every 12 inches, but of course this is very customizable. Be sure to take your time when measuring. My board was a little shorter than 4 feet, so it took me forever to find out the even spacings. No joke, I'm pretty sure this video is at like times 20 speed, and yet it looked like I was moving at a normal speed. Once you're done with that, leave a line at every mark, because you'll be cutting with the circular saw pretty soon. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that I'm using a speed square to guide the circular saw. This pretty much just ensures that the cut is straight. Once that's all done, check your cuts and make any adjustments if needed. Now's your time to be selective. Pick which side you want to face what direction. I noticed that this one had a rough bottom, so I'm going to use this as the base. Right here, you'll notice I'm measuring the center point, and that's because we're going to drill into it. Once I found the center, I drilled a 1-inch hole using a spade bit. And I wasn't too worried about drilling through the other side, because it's at the bottom so it wouldn't be visible anyway. You also want to find the center on the backside and drill through it with a 3/8 bit. You're going to run the lamp wire through here and it'll come out through the top. I know this wood block is a little different than the one we were just working with, but this is for a different lamp. I seem to have lost the other footage, so we'll be using this as the example. But we're back to our original piece, so don't worry. Now we can move on to the wood stain. In this application, I used Verithane's Early American Stain. And I think this goes without saying, but for the staining process, you would just grab a rag, wipe the stain onto the wood, and then wipe it off with a clean rag. It's probably also a good idea to wear some rubber gloves, just because the stain can be a little bit hard to remove off your hands once you're done. On this portion of the build, we're moving back to the base. Notice that I'm using 2x lumber as a reference point. This is being done because I want the screws to line up perfectly once we add the 2 side walls. I'm also drilling a small hole at the bottom so that the screw head doesn't stick out of it. You'll see what I mean in just 1 second. We're going to add the two sidewalls now by screwing the base to them. This corner clamp is not absolutely necessary, but it definitely helps when lining up the pieces of wood. Notice that I'm also adding some wood glue. I can't imagine that you would need this because the lamp probably won't be taking too much stress, but it's always good for peace of mind. And after making all the adjustments necessary for those two sidewalls, you can start prepping the top so that it's ready once you need it. Just keep in mind that you won't actually be adding the top to the frame until a later point in time, and this is because you're going to need access to the light assembly. Now, when it comes to preparing the top, you have all the options in the world, and these options are entirely dependent on the look that you're going for. I personally left 3 evenly spaced marks on each side, and this is so I can use a 3/8 drill bit to drill some holes for the screws, which I'll later cover up with glue and wooden plugs. And keep in mind, this is an industrial lamp, so even drilling straight into the top with some screws would reinforce the industrial theme. If you prefer a more subtle look, I would try trim nails and wood glue on the opposite side. Wood glue is pretty strong, so you'll be just fine. Now we're moving back to the light assembly. We're going to be screwing the assembly straight to the base. Keep in mind we are running an electrical wire through this, so make sure that the screw holes don't line up with that wire. Notice that I shifted the screws from a cross alignment to more of an X. This will help you avoid the wire. Make note of the mistake that I made here. I started drilling into the base without actually running the wire through the back of the lamp. You want to do that because once the metal assembly is attached to the base, it is very difficult to access the wire, so be sure to run it through first and then start attaching the metal. And while we're at it, we're also going to add the little rubber plug just because this can't be added at a later point in time. The rubber plug is not absolutely necessary, but it definitely gives the lamp a clean look, and this is because it helps cover up the hole that you drilled to run the wire into. Now, keep in mind that I used some pretty long screws to attach the metal to the base. You can definitely save yourself all this work by simply getting screws that are shorter than 1.5 inches, which is the thickness of the wooden base. I definitely don't recommend doing this part the way I did it. Now that that's all done, we're going to move on to the wiring. And this part's a secret, so I can't show you. Definitely kidding, that was just terrible camera work. But right here, we want to use a little thing called a crank and shrink. I had never worked with these before, so I'll be sure to link them in the description. The crank and shrink basically has a little metal tube in it. You're going to grab the lamp wire and stick it into one end, then grab the light socket wire and stick it into the other. From there, just grab some metal pliers and pinch each wire. Doing so locks in the wire on each end, and therefore this is the crank portion. After that's all done, grab a lighter and hover over the rubber portion. The rubber will get smaller, lock in both wires and the tube, and that addresses the shrink portion. Notice that I slipped in some heat shrink tubing. This is basically going to do the same thing as the blue rubber, but it's really only there as an extra layer of reinforcement so that things don't move around. And of course, be sure to slip this in before you start the crank and shrink process, just because you won't be able to slip it in later. The light socket fits perfectly into the metal base even without the glue, so adding a little bit of glue will just help reinforce the bond. Since you're already working with Gorilla Glue at this point, it's the perfect opportunity to attach the rubber plug that we mentioned earlier to the back side of the lamp. In my case, the rubber plug wasn't cooperating the whole time, so you might actually have to grab something to hold it in place while the glue dries. If this were a cooking video, I would say that this moment is pretty close to the taste test. In your case, it would probably be ideal to test the lighting system shortly after you finish the wiring. You don't want to get to this point and find out that it's not working. At this point, we now have a presentable and working product, but it's always the details that are the most important. To add a protective layer and bring the color of the lamp to life, I used Verithane's water-based polyurethane. If you pay close attention, you'll notice that there's a white hue to the areas that the polyurethane has been applied to. This goes away once it dries, and I believe it only happens so you can tell which areas have been coated already. In my experience, using a sponge brush works best for an even application. had a ton of fun working on this project, and if you've made it this far, I hope that you've enjoyed it too. I've built things in the past, but I've never added any electrical components to them. After trying it out, it really wasn't that bad, and I hope that you think so as well. If you like what you've seen today, feel free to like and subscribe, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. It's honestly the only way I'll know whether I should keep making content like this or not. But until then, it's lights out. Thank you for watching.